Hi, and welcome to the fourth video, which is part of our videos on fractions, decimals and percentages. And the focus for this video is from changing from percentages to decimals. However, I really do not want people thinking them of different topics. Every time you're working on something, think how it connects with the information you've received before or how you've processed things, because everything is very connected. So percentages. Well, in the last video, we discovered, hopefully, that any percentage, so let's start with the most obvious, 50%, or one of the most obvious. We looked at how that can be written as 50 over 100. So we learned, in fact, any percentage can be written as a fraction out of 100. And another way of saying that is 50 hundredths. So it's 50 hundredths. So again, that immediately connects us into place value, and we would write it as 50 hundredths. Now, we could just leave it in that format. But in the same way that we simplify fractions, we can also simplify this decimal slightly. In video 1, we looked at zeros and how a 0 on the end of a decimal does not have an impact on that number, on that value. So we could also write that as 0.5. So 50% becomes 0.5. Let's try a couple of others. 40%, well, we know that's 40 over 100, so we can write it as hundredths by putting 0.40. And then, because again we don't need to show that 0, we can simplify to 0.4. So we're looking at the pattern of what's happening here. 60 out of 100 is going to become 0.60 or 0.6. So there we have. So when we've got a percentage like that where it's in the tens, then we are going to end up with 0.6, 0.4, 0.5. So I'm sure you can predict what 20% would become. 0.20, which of course can be written as 0.2. Now let's look at what happens when they don't end with a 0. So, missed out the percentage there, sorry. 25%, which is 25 over 100, would become 0.25. And as we have digits there, that's how it stays in its simplest format. .5, and again, because we haven't got that 0 on the end, we just leave it in that format. So where you may need to think about it is when we get into something like this, 5%. Because we have to remember that that equals 5 over 100. So 5/100ths, and to write 5/100ths, we would need to write it like that, 0.05. I've often seen students think 5%, okay, so following the same rule, we're just writing that number, so it would be 0.5. But if you stop and even think about it for a second, you know that 0.5 is 50%, so it can't possibly be 5%. But also, we need to be clear on why. If it's 5%, it's 5/100ths, and 5/100ths would have to be written in this column. Just like if you wanted 500, then you have to put the 5 in the column where the hundreds are, and then there'll be zeros after it. So have a go at, let me rub some of this and we'll look at some different percentages. And if you like, you can pause, have a go, and then replay. So let's do 3%, 12%, and 6%. So write what you think those are as decimals, and then replay the video. Okay, so 3% is 3 out of 100, 3/100ths. So it would need to be written like that. 12%, 12/100ths, so 12/100ths. 6%, okay, so we're just following place value. Where it gets trickier still maybe is if we had, what about if we had 3.5%? So we're using a decimal already, and we've got to turn this into a decimal. Well, 3.5% would still mean 3.5/100ths, which looks weird in itself because we're not used to mixing decimals and fractions. So we'd be more likely to write that as 35/1000ths. So I'm just moving everything a place value, and then we can see it written in decimals. It's now going into the thousandth column, so it would be written like this. Now let's think about this a bit more. Going back to how it was here, 3.5% is like saying 3 out of 100, and then another half of 100th. Half of 100th. So it's got to be less than 100th. So it's got to be moving in to the thousandth column. Now that might take some thinking about, but once you get that idea about the place value and how far along it's going, then you can do these movements from percentages to decimals. And it is really about just shifting 2 places to whatever your number is. It is going to shift 2 places along. Okay, have a think about that. And we're going to look at decimals to percentages, which might help with both versions. So when we do the inverse, we're always going to be doing the opposite thing. Okay, that's the end of this video.